Clara was born in a small village nestled in the countryside, where life was simple but often harsh. Her father had been a blacksmith and her mother a weaver, but they struggled to make ends meet. Despite their poverty, Clara's childhood was filled with love and warmth. However, tragedy struck when a sudden fever took both of her parents, leaving her an orphan at the tender age of 13. The village elders, seeing the girl's resilience and kind heart, took pity on her and arranged for her to be sent to the Beaumont estate to work as a maid. Clara had heard tales of the Beaumonts. They were one of the wealthiest families in the region, living in a grand estate surrounded by lush gardens and a forest so dense it felt like a different world. The Beaumonts were known for their wealth, but also for their fairness. The staff in the village spoke well of them, particularly the master of the house, Mr. Henry Beaumont, who was kind to his servants. On her first day at the estate, Clara was both overwhelmed and amazed by the grandeur of her new home. The mansion was unlike anything she had ever seen. Tall, sweeping staircases, polished marble floors, chandeliers that glittered like stars. It felt like a world apart from her humble beginnings. Clara was determined to work hard and prove herself worthy of being part of this world. Over the years, Clara's diligence and attention to detail caught the attention of Mr. Beaumont. She quickly rose from performing menial tasks to becoming one of the more trusted staff members, known for her ability to manage the house and her deep sense of responsibility. Despite her growing role, Clara remained humble and never lost the values instilled in her by her parents: kindness, patience, and empathy. But there was always one mystery that intrigued Clara: the elusive Beaumont son, Edward. He was never seen, and the other staff spoke of him only in hushed tones. Edward Beaumont was a man of myth among the estate's staff. Though technically the heir to the Beaumont fortune, he was rarely seen. Even as a child, Edward had been reclusive, preferring the solitude of his chambers or long walks in the forest that bordered the estate. His father, Mr. Beaumont, often said that Edward had grown shy after his mother's death when he was just a boy. That loss had deeply affected him, and he had never fully recovered from it. But there were darker rumors, too. It was whispered among the maids that Edward's appearance was unsettling. Some claimed he had been disfigured in an accident as a child, while others suggested that an illness had left him scarred. The truth remained elusive, as no one except for Mr. Beaumont and a few trusted staff members had seen Edward in recent years. The mystery only grew with time. Clara, though curious, never paid much attention to the gossip. She had always believed that a person's character mattered far more than their appearance, and she dismissed the rumors as idle talk. Still, she couldn't help but wonder about Edward. Occasionally, she would catch glimpses of him in the distance, standing in the shadow of a tall oak tree, or walking alone in the garden, always careful to avoid being seen up close. He seemed more like a ghost than a living person in his own home. Despite his elusive nature, Edward had noticed Clara. He had watched her over the years, admiring her dedication and kindness from afar. He found himself drawn to her compassion, her strength, and the way she treated everyone with respect. But he feared revealing himself to her, not because of his appearance, but because of his deep insecurities. Edward had always been handsome, but he had grown to resent the way people treated him solely for his looks. He had hidden himself from the world to test who would love him for who he truly was, not what he looked like. One day, Clara was summoned to Mr. Beaumont's office. It was an unusual request. Mr. Beaumont was kind but distant with most of his staff, only engaging with them for matters of importance. Clara, dressed in her modest maid's uniform, made her way to the study, her heart racing with uncertainty. As she entered, Mr. Beaumont greeted her with his usual warmth, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that Clara hadn't seen before. He motioned for her to sit, and she did, smoothing her apron nervously. "Clara," he began, "I've watched you grow into an exceptional young woman. You've been more than just a maid to this household. You've been the heart of it. I know you've heard whispers about my son, Edward. He has kept himself hidden for reasons I'm sure you've heard exaggerated over time. But there's one thing you should know. Edward has long admired you." Clara blinked in surprise. Edward? Admired her? The reclusive son she had never spoken to? Mr. Beaumont continued, Edward has asked for something I never expected. He wishes to marry you. Clara's mind reeled. Marriage? To Edward? She had never even spoken to him, and yet, here was his father asking her to become his bride. The rumors of Edward's appearance and reclusiveness flooded her mind. Could she really marry someone she had never truly met? Someone who had hidden from the world for so long? I don't understand, sir, Clara finally said. Why me? I'm just a maid. You are more than that, Mr. Beaumont replied gently. Edward believes you are the only person who sees beyond appearances. He has been watching you, Clara. He believes you are someone who could truly love him, not for what people say he looks like, but for who he is. Clara felt torn. She had no desire for wealth or status, but she also didn't want to turn her back on someone in need. She had always believed in seeing the good in people, and she trusted Mr. Beaumont's judgment. After a long pause, she nodded. I will marry him, she said softly, but I would like to meet him first. The next evening, Clara was led to Edward's private wing of the estate. She had never ventured this far into the mansion before, and the dark, winding halls gave her a sense of foreboding. As she approached the door to Edward's chambers, her heart raced. The door opened slowly, and she stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a few candles, casting long shadows across the walls. Edward stood near the window, his back to her, gazing out at the garden. He was tall, with broad shoulders, but the shadows made it difficult to see his face. Edward. Clara's voice trembled slightly as she spoke his name for the first time. He turned slowly, still keeping his face in the shadows. Thank you for coming, Clara, he said softly. His voice was deep, but there was a vulnerability in it that surprised her. Clara took a step closer, trying to see him more clearly. Why do you hide from the world? She asked gently. Edward hesitated before answering. I've been hiding for so long that I don't remember how to live any other way. People only see what's on the outside. They judge before they know who you really are. Clara's heart softened. She understood his fear, even if she couldn't fully comprehend the pain he had endured. I don't care about appearances, Edward. I only care about the person you are. Edward stepped closer, and for the first time, Clara could see his face. He was, in fact, strikingly handsome, far more so than she had imagined. His features were strong and symmetrical, his green eyes piercing. Clara was stunned, but not because of his beauty. She was shocked by the contrast between the rumors and reality. Why did you let people believe those things about you? Clara asked, still processing what she saw. Edward sighed. It was easier that way. I needed to know if someone could love me for who I am, not for what I look like. Clara stepped even closer, her hand reaching for his. I want to know the man inside, she said softly. I want to know the real you. After that fateful night, Clara found herself thinking constantly about Edward. Their brief interaction had left a deep impression on her heart. The moment he had revealed his face, the world seemed to shift, not because of his appearance, but because of the raw vulnerability he had shown her. She had expected to find a man deeply scarred, perhaps by illness or accident, but what she had seen was a man scarred only by the cruel judgments of society. Edward, in turn, found himself equally moved by Clara's reaction. She had not recoiled, nor had she fawned over his beauty like so many others had in the past. Instead, she had sought to understand him, to see the person beneath the exterior. For the first time in many years, Edward felt hope stir within him, a hope that perhaps he could be loved for who he truly was. Over the following days, Edward and Clara began to spend more time together. Their interactions were quiet at first, filled with small conversations about the estate, the garden, and their daily lives. Slowly, however, their exchanges grew more intimate. Edward spoke of his childhood, of how he had lost his mother at a young age and how that loss had shaped him. He confessed how, in his youth, people had often praised him for his looks, but as he grew older, he came to resent the superficial attention. Clara listened with a quiet understanding. She shared stories of her own past, the village where she had grown up, the loss of her parents, and the journey that had brought her to the Beaumont estate. She spoke of the simple life she had once led, and how, despite the hardships, there had always been love and kindness to sustain her. Edward admired her resilience and humility, and the bond between them deepened with each passing day. Weeks passed, and their relationship blossomed into something far more profound than either of them had anticipated. Edward found himself looking forward to each moment spent with Clara. Her presence was like a balm to his soul, soothing the years of isolation and loneliness he had endured. Clara, too, felt her heart shifting in ways she had not expected. What had begun as an arrangement born of duty had transformed into a deep and abiding affection. One evening, as they sat together in the estate's grand library, Edward turned to Clara with a seriousness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "Clara," he began, his voice soft but filled with emotion, "I need to tell you something." Clara looked at him, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. She could sense the gravity of his words, though she couldn't yet guess what he was about to say. "I've never felt this way about anyone before," Edward confessed. "You've shown me a kind of love that I didn't think was possible, one that's not based on appearances or what people expect. I'm not just grateful to you, I love you." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had known, deep down, that her feelings for Edward had grown into something more than friendship, but hearing him say the words aloud sent a rush of warmth through her. She placed her hand over his, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I love you too, Edward," she whispered. "I didn't expect it and I didn't see it coming, but I love you for the man you are, not the man the world thinks you are." They sat together in the quiet, the weight of their confessions settling over them like a warm embrace. For the first time in his life, Edward felt truly seen, not just for his looks, but for the person he was beneath them. And Clara, who had never imagined she would find love in such an unexpected place, felt her heart swell with happiness. Their love grew stronger with each passing day, but as their bond deepened, so too did the challenges they faced. Though Edward had revealed his true self to Clara, he remained hesitant to show his face to the rest of the world. He had spent so long hiding behind the veil of rumors that the idea of stepping into the light terrified him. One morning, as they walked through the gardens hand in hand, Clara broached the subject gently. "Edward," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I understand why you've hidden yourself away for so long, but I also think it's time for you to face the world. You don't have to hide anymore." Edward looked at her, uncertainty clouding his eyes. "What if they still judge me, Clara? What if they see me as nothing more than a handsome face and don't care about who I really am?" Clara stopped walking and turned to face him, taking both of his hands in hers. "You've shown me your heart, Edward. You're kind, thoughtful, and compassionate. The people who matter, the ones who truly care about you, will see that too. And I'll be by your side every step of the way." Her words gave Edward the courage he needed. With Clara's unwavering support, he slowly began to re-enter the world he had once retreated from. The staff of the estate, many of whom had never seen Edward's face, were surprised to discover that the man they had once whispered about was not disfigured, but rather strikingly handsome. But more than that, they saw the changes in him, the confidence he had gained, the warmth he now exuded. Word of Edward's return spread beyond the estate, reaching the nearby village and even the city. People were curious about the once reclusive heir, and some came to the estate, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. At first, the attention overwhelmed Edward, but with Clara by his side, he navigated the scrutiny with grace and patience. Just as things seemed to be settling into a new normal, an unexpected challenge arose. Edward's distant cousin, Lord Victor Beaumont, arrived at the estate. Lord Victor was ambitious and envious of Edward's inheritance. He had always hoped that Edward would remain hidden away, allowing him to eventually claim the estate for himself. Victor, upon seeing Clara and learning of her humble origins as a maid, immediately sought to sow discord between them. He approached Edward with thinly veiled disdain, attempting to manipulate him. "Edward," Victor said one evening, as they sat together in the parlor, you're the heir to the Beaumont fortune. Do you really think it's fitting for someone of your status to marry a maid?" Edward's face darkened, but before he could respond, Victor continued, "You could have any woman you want, someone of noble birth, someone who would elevate your status. A maid? What will people think? What will they say?" For a brief moment, Victor's words gnawed at Edward's insecurities. The years of hiding, of fearing judgment, resurfaced, and doubt crept into his mind. But then he thought of Clara, of her kindness, her strength, and the love they shared. "She may be a maid," Edward finally said, his voice steady, "but she's the only one who ever saw me for who I really am. She's the only one whose love isn't based on titles or appearances. I'd rather have her by my side than anyone else." Victor, seeing that his attempt to manipulate Edward had failed, left the estate in a huff, but not before vowing that he would one day return to claim what he believed was rightfully his. With Victor gone, Edward and Clara were able to focus on building their life together. They made plans for the future, discussing how they wanted to use the wealth of the Beaumont estate to help the less fortunate. Clara, having come from a humble background, was passionate about using her newfound influence to support orphans, like she once was, and to provide opportunities for those who had none. Edward, inspired by Clara's vision, began to open the estate's doors to the community, hosting charitable events and providing employment for those in need. Together, they transformed the estate from a place of isolation into a beacon of hope and generosity. Their love continued to grow, strengthened by the challenges they had faced and the dreams they shared. Edward no longer feared judgment, for he had found someone who loved him for all the right reasons. And Clara, who had once been an orphan maid, had found not only love but a purpose that gave her life new meaning. As time passed, Edward and Clara's love was tested once more, this time by a personal tragedy. Mr. Beaumont, who had always supported their relationship, fell gravely ill. His health declined rapidly, and soon, it became clear that he didn't have much time left. On his deathbed, Mr. Beaumont called Edward and Clara to his side. His once strong voice was weak, but his words were filled with love. "Edward, Clara," he said, "you've both brought such joy to my life. I've watched you grow together, and I know that this estate will be in good hands once I'm gone." Tears filled Edward's eyes as he grasped his father's hand. "Thank you, Father, for everything." Clara, standing by Edward's side, felt a deep sadness for the man who had given her the opportunity to change her life. She knelt beside him and whispered, "I'll always be grateful to you, Mr. Beaumont. You've given me a family." Mr. Beaumont smiled weakly. "And you've given my son the greatest gift of all, love." With those final words, Mr. Beaumont passed away, leaving behind a legacy of kindness, generosity, and love. After Mr. Beaumont's passing, the weight of managing the estate fell fully on Edward's shoulders. Though his father's death brought great sorrow, Edward knew he had to honor the man's memory by continuing the work he had started, both in managing the estate and in supporting the community around them. Clara, as always, stood by his side, offering her quiet strength and wisdom. Together, they faced the challenges of running a vast estate. The land required careful management, the staff needed direction, and the charitable projects they had begun needed overseeing. Clara, who had once only known the life of a maid, quickly adapted to her new role, learning the ins and outs of estate management. She was a natural leader, respected by both the staff and the villagers who came to seek her help. As the months passed, Edward and Clara became known not just for their wealth, but for their generosity. The Beaumont estate became a place where the less fortunate could find work, where the orphaned could find shelter, and where the sick could receive care. Edward had always been a private man, but with Clara's encouragement, he opened his heart to the world, using his position to make a difference. One day, as Clara was overseeing a shipment of supplies for the orphanage they had established, she was surprised to see a familiar face walking through the gates of the estate, her childhood friend, Amelia. Amelia had been one of the few friends Clara had growing up in the village. The two had been inseparable as children, but after Clara had been sent to the Beaumont estate, they had lost touch. "Clara?" Amelia's voice was filled with disbelief as she approached. Clara turned, her heart skipping a beat. "Amelia, is it really you?" The two women embraced, their laughter mingling with tears as they recounted old memories. Clara learned that Amelia had fallen on hard times after her own parents had passed away, much like Clara had. She had come to the estate, hoping to find work. "You don't have to work here, Amelia," Clara said gently. "You're my friend. You'll stay with us." Amelia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of accepting charity, but Clara insisted. Over time, Amelia became not only a trusted companion but a confidant. She admired the woman Clara had become and saw firsthand the deep love between Clara and Edward. Though she had once envied Clara's position, she now saw that her friend's kindness and determination had earned her every bit of happiness she had. While life at the estate seemed peaceful, trouble was brewing in the background. Edward's cousin, Lord Victor Beaumont, had not forgotten the slight he felt when Edward had rejected his manipulations. Bitter and vengeful, Victor had been biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Victor had always been ambitious, and he resented the fact that Edward, who had once hidden away in isolation, now stood as the beloved master of the estate, adored by both the staff and the community. In Victor's mind, Edward's rise in status was a direct challenge to his own ambitions. One night, while Edward and Clara were enjoying a rare, quiet evening together, a letter arrived, addressed to Edward. The wax seal bore the mark of the Beaumont family, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. Edward opened the letter cautiously, his brow furrowing as he read. "What is it?" Clara asked, sensing the tension in his posture. "It's from Victor," Edward replied, his voice low. "He's requesting a meeting. It seems he wants to discuss matters of family inheritance." Clara's heart sank. She had always felt uneasy about Victor, and the idea of him stirring trouble now, just as they had finally found peace, was unsettling. "What will you do?" she asked, her hand resting on his arm. Edward sighed, folding the letter. "I'll meet him. I need to know what he's planning." Despite her concerns, Clara trusted Edward's judgment. She knew he had grown into a strong, confident leader, but part of her couldn't shake the feeling that Victor's visit would bring trouble. A few days later, Edward met Victor in the town's old courthouse, a neutral ground away from the estate. Victor arrived with his usual air of superiority, but there was something darker in his eyes this time. "Edward," Victor greeted him with a false smile. "It's been far too long." "Let's skip the pleasantries, Victor," Edward replied coolly. "What do you want?" Victor's smile faded, replaced by a sneer. "What I want is what should have been mine. The estate, the fortune, all of it. You were never fit to inherit it, Edward. You hid away like a coward for years, and now you think you can waltz back in and play the hero?" Edward remained calm, though he could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "This estate was always Father's choice to give. You know that." "I know that our family has a reputation to uphold," Victor spat. "And you, with your precious little maid wife, have done nothing but tarnish it." Edward's eyes narrowed. "Watch your words, Victor." But Victor wasn't finished. "Oh, don't think I don't know what people are saying. The Beaumont heir marries a servant girl. It's a scandal. You're dragging the family name through the mud, and I won't stand for it." Edward stood his ground, his voice firm. "Clara is worth more than every ounce of gold in this estate. If you think for one second that I'll let you insult her or what we've built, you're mistaken." Victor's face twisted with rage. "You're a fool, Edward, and I'll prove it. I've been speaking with some very influential people who think I should be the one in charge. You may have the estate for now, but mark my words, I'll take it from you, one way or another." With that, Victor stormed out of the room, leaving Edward standing alone. The threat lingered in the air, and Edward knew that his cousin's ambition would not be easily thwarted. After returning to the estate, Edward confided in Clara about the confrontation with Victor. Though Clara had expected Victor to be spiteful, hearing about his plans to take the estate was alarming. "We can't let him win," Clara said firmly. This estate means more than just wealth. It's become a place of hope for so many people. We can't let him destroy that." Edward agreed, but they both knew they needed help. The following day, they traveled to the city to seek counsel from one of Mr. Beaumont's old friends, a lawyer named Sir Geoffrey Caraway. Sir Geoffrey had long been a trusted ally of the Beaumont family and had helped Mr. Beaumont secure the estate's future years ago. When they arrived at Sir Geoffrey's office, the elderly lawyer greeted them warmly, but with concern in his eyes. "I've heard rumblings about your cousin Edward," he said as they sat down. "Victor's been stirring up trouble for some time now." "We need to stop him," Edward said. "He's threatening not just the estate, but everything Clara and I have worked for." Sir Geoffrey nodded thoughtfully. "There are legal avenues we can explore. Your father's will is airtight, and Victor has no legitimate claim to the estate. But men like Victor don't always play by the rules." Clara's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Sir Geoffrey said, leaning forward, "that Victor may try to undermine you through less than honorable means. He could spread rumors, manipulate people, try to sabotage your reputation. We need to be prepared for anything." Clara and Edward exchanged a glance. They knew the road ahead would not be easy, but with Sir Geoffrey's guidance, they felt more prepared to face whatever Victor might throw their way. Returning to the estate, Clara and Edward began fortifying their position. They strengthened their connections within the community, ensuring that the people who had benefited from their generosity would stand by them if Victor tried to turn public opinion against them. Clara, in particular, took an active role in reaching out to the villagers, reminding them of the good the Beaumont estate had done. She knew that if Victor sought to spread lies, the truth of their actions would be their greatest defense. Meanwhile, Edward worked with Sir Geoffrey to review the legal protections surrounding the estate. Together, they ensured that every document was in order, every loophole closed. Victor might have ambition, but Edward had integrity, and he was determined to protect the legacy his father had entrusted to him. Amidst the challenges with Victor, Edward and Clara found solace in each other. The hardships they faced only deepened their bond, and their love became the foundation upon which they built their future. One evening, as they walked through the gardens, Edward turned to Clara with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he said, "about us, about everything we've been through together." Clara smiled softly. "What about it?" "I realized," Edward continued, "that I never properly asked you to marry me. Our engagement was arranged out of circumstance, and while I'll never regret a moment of our life together, I want to give you the proposal you deserve." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "Edward." He took her hands in his gaze steady and filled with love. "Clara, will you marry me? Not because of any arrangement or duty, but because you are the love of my life, and I can't imagine my future without you?" Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Edward. 1,000 times, yes." The day of Edward and Clara's wedding approached quickly, and while there was an air of joy surrounding the event, there was also a quiet tension. Despite the preparations for the ceremony, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was plotting something behind the scenes. The village, which had come to adore Clara for her kindness and generosity, was abuzz with excitement. The Beaumont estate had been transformed for the wedding, with decorations adorning every corner, and the staff working tirelessly to ensure everything was perfect. Clara had insisted on a simple, heartfelt ceremony, one that honored the humble beginnings she came from. She wanted the wedding to be about love, not the pomp and grandeur that often accompanied such events. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Clara stood in her room, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down the delicate lace of her dress. Amelia, ever the loyal friend, stood beside her, adjusting the veil. "You look beautiful," Amelia said softly, her eyes filled with pride for her childhood friend. Clara smiled, though her heart was racing. "I never thought I'd be standing here, Amelia. To think, I was once just a maid in this house, and now? Now you're marrying the man you love," Amelia finished with a knowing smile. "And you're doing it with grace and strength." The ceremony was held in the garden, beneath the grand oak tree that Edward and Clara had spent so many afternoons sitting under, sharing their hopes and dreams. As Clara walked down the aisle, her eyes locked with Edward's. The world around them seemed to blur, and for that moment, nothing else mattered. The vows they exchanged were simple but filled with emotion. Edward promised Clara that he would always cherish her, not as the maid who had entered his life unexpectedly, but as the woman who had transformed his world. Clara, in turn, vowed to stand by his side through every storm, knowing that their love was a shelter from whatever challenges lay ahead. Though the wedding was a joyous occasion, it didn't go unnoticed that Victor had not sent any acknowledgement or congratulations. His absence, though expected, weighed on Edward's mind. Despite the happiness of the day, the lingering threat of Victor's ambitions was like a shadow over their future. That night, as Edward and Clara danced under the stars at the wedding reception, whispers reached Edward's ears. Guests murmured that Victor had been seen in the city, meeting with influential figures, some of whom had a reputation for dubious dealings. There were rumors that he was planning something, though no one knew exactly what. Clara noticed Edward's furrowed brow and gently touched his arm. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft amid the music and laughter surrounding them. "It's Victor," Edward admitted, his eyes scanning the crowd. "I can't shake the feeling that he's planning something that could threaten everything we've built." Clara's gaze hardened with determination. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. We've been through so much already, Edward. He won't tear us apart." Edward nodded, grateful for Clara's strength. "You're right. I won't let him ruin this for us." But even as they returned to their celebration, the unease lingered, and Edward knew that the battle with Victor was far from over. Several weeks passed in relative peace after the wedding, but the quiet was deceptive. Edward had kept a close watch on Victor's movements, and it soon became clear that his cousin was not content to let things be. One morning, a notice arrived at the estate, an official summons from the local court. Victor had filed a legal claim, challenging Edward's inheritance of the Beaumont estate. In his claim, Victor alleged that Edward was unfit to manage the estate, citing his years of reclusiveness and his unsuitable marriage to a maid as proof. Edward slammed the letter down on his desk, his hands shaking with fury. "He's trying to take everything from us, Clara," he said, his voice thick with anger. "He's claiming that I'm unfit to run the estate because I married you." Clara's face paled, but she stood tall. "He's grasping at straws. You know that, and so does everyone who matters." Edward ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "He's desperate, but he's also dangerous. If this goes to court, there's no telling what lengths he'll go to." Sir Geoffrey was immediately called to the estate. The elderly lawyer reviewed the summons with a grim expression. "It's a bold move," he said, tapping the paper with his fingers, "but not an entirely unexpected one. Victor is hoping to drag your name through the mud and use public opinion against you." "We need to fight back," Edward said firmly. Sir Geoffrey nodded. "We will, but this won't be a simple matter. Victor is cunning, and he'll use every resource he has to try and discredit you." Clara, who had been silent up until this point, spoke up. "Then we'll show them the truth. We've done nothing but good since we took over the estate. The people know that. We have to trust that our actions will speak louder than his lies." Edward looked at her, his heart swelling with pride and love. "You're right, Clara. We'll fight this together." With the court date looming, Edward and Clara worked tirelessly to gather evidence in their defense. They called upon the villagers, the staff, and anyone who had benefited from the changes they had made to the estate. Letters of support poured in, from those who had found employment, from orphans who had been given a home, and from the sick who had received care through the charity Edward and Clara had established. The village itself rallied behind them, organizing meetings to show their solidarity. Clara, who had become a beloved figure in the community, took it upon herself to speak directly to the people. She visited every corner of the village, reminding them of the work they had done together and asking for their continued support. Amelia, always by Clara's side, helped to organize the growing group of allies. "Victor may have power," Amelia said one evening as they worked late into the night, "but he doesn't have the heart of the people. That's something you and Edward have earned." Clara smiled at her friend's words. "Thank you, Amelia. I don't know what I'd do without you." As the court date approached, Clara and Edward felt a growing sense of hope. They had built something real, something meaningful, and they were determined not to let Victor destroy it. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the tension was palpable. The courthouse was filled with spectators, villagers, staff from the estate, and others who had come to witness the outcome of what had become a highly publicized feud. Victor, smug and confident, entered the courtroom flanked by his legal team. He wasted no time in presenting his case, painting Edward as a recluse unfit to manage the estate, and Clara as an opportunist who had used her position as a maid to rise above her station. But when it was Edward's turn to speak, he did so with calm dignity. He spoke of the years he had spent isolated, yes, but also of the strength he had found through Clara's love. He detailed the work they had done to improve the estate and to support the community. Then, Clara stood to testify. Her voice was steady as she spoke about her life before coming to the Beaumont estate, and the sense of purpose she had found in serving others alongside Edward. She reminded the court that the true measure of a person's worth was not in their birthright or their title, but in the good they did for others. Her words struck a chord with those present, and as she finished, there was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. The final blow to Victor's case came when Sir Geoffrey presented the will of Edward's father, Mr. Beaumont. The will clearly stated that Edward was the rightful heir, and that his character, not his marital status, was what mattered in the management of the estate. Victor's face twisted in defeat as the judge ruled in Edward's favor. The courtroom erupted in cheers, and Clara felt the weight of the past few months lift from her shoulders. With the court battle behind them, Edward and Clara could finally breathe easy. Victor, humiliated and defeated, slunk away, his plans to take over the estate thwarted. It was unlikely that they would ever hear from him again. Life returned to normal at the Beaumont estate, but it was a new kind of normal. Edward and Clara, having faced their greatest challenge yet, were more united than ever. They continued their work, expanding their charitable efforts and deepening their connection to the community. As the months turned into years, the estate flourished under their care. The orphanage grew, providing education and hope for children who had once known only hardship. The village prospered, thanks in part to the jobs and opportunities created by the estate's new ventures. Clara, who had once been a maid with no prospects, had become a beloved leader and philanthropist. Edward, who had once hidden from the world, had emerged as a man of integrity, strength, and love. And together, they had built a legacy, not of wealth or power, but of kindness, generosity, and a love that had defied all odds. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.